Good evening. Tonight we're diving headfirst into a topic that's as uplifting as a root canal during a tax audit corruption. Yes, that insidious rot that plagues societies worldwide. Now, corruption is a global issue, but some countries, bless their hearts, stand out for all the wrong reasons. They're not just playing in the minor leagues of bribery, they're the World Series champions of institutional decay, the undisputed heavyweights of graft. It's a competition where winning means everyone else loses, spectacularly. So, what do we mean by corruption in this context? Think of it as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It's not just a politician pocketing a few bucks. It's police demanding fees to do their job, judges selling verdicts to the highest bidder, and entire national treasuries being treated like a personal piggy bank for the ruling elite. It's the systematic dismantling of public trust for personal enrichment, a cancer that hollows out a country from the inside, leaving its citizens to deal with the consequences. Before we begin our rather depressing world tour, a quick note on methodology. This list isn't just my opinion as much as I'd love to just point at a map and yell. It's based on the hard work of organizations like Transparency International and their Corruption Perception Index. They survey experts and business people to gauge the perceived levels of public sector corruption in countries around the globe. So buckle up because we're about to count down the places where public service is just a charmingly ironic phrase. Kicking off our list at number 1, a country that has for years been the undisputed heavyweight champion of chaos, Somalia. Yes, Somalia. Consistently ranking at the very bottom of the corruption index isn't an accident. It's the tragic, logical outcome of decades of state collapse and relentless conflict. When you don't have a functioning central government, the very concept of public sector corruption becomes almost quaint. It's less about a system being corrupt and more about the absence of any system at all, other than the one where the person with the most guns makes the rules. It's a free-for-all where public assets are plundered and international aid often vanishes into a black hole of competing warlords and factions. Imagine trying to build a house on quicksand during a hurricane. That's essentially the challenge of governance in Somalia. The institutions that are supposed to prevent corruption, a judiciary, a police force, a national treasury, are either incredibly weak, non-existent, or compromised beyond recognition. This power vacuum creates a perfect breeding ground for every form of graft imaginable, from piracy on the high seas to bribery at local checkpoints. For the average Somali citizen, this isn't an abstract concept. It's a daily reality that stifles any chance of security, stability, or a better future. It's a heartbreaking example of how the absence of the rule of law is the most fertile soil for corruption to grow. Next up we have the world's youngest nation, South Sudan. And sadly, its childhood has been nothing short of horrific. Born in 2011 with so much international hope and goodwill, it quickly descended into a brutal civil war, fueled by a power struggle between political elites. And when leaders are more focused on fighting each other for control of the country's vast oil reserves, things like accountability and public welfare tend to get thrown out the window, set on fire, and then the ashes are thrown out a different window. The state's resources, particularly its oil wealth, are not seen as a public good, but as a prize to be captured and exploited by the victorious faction. This has created a kleptocracy of staggering proportions. The ruling class has allegedly siphoned billions of dollars from state coffers, buying lavish properties abroad while their own people face famine and a humanitarian crisis of biblical proportions. The military and political leaders are deeply intertwined, meaning the very people who control the guns also control the money, a combination that is, to put it mildly, not conducive to good governance. The Civil War has shattered any semblance of state institutions, leaving a fractured, violent landscape where corruption isn't just a flaw in the system, the system. Our next stop is Syria, a country ravaged by over a decade of brutal, soul-crushing civil war. And while the human cost of that conflict is incalculable, it has also created a perfect storm for corruption on an industrial scale. The Assad regime, clinging to power, has weaponized state resources, rewarding loyalists with economic opportunities and control over lucrative smuggling networks. In a war economy, everything has a price, from humanitarian aid to basic government services to safe passage through a checkpoint. The state has effectively become a mafia, where survival depends on your connections and your ability to pay. Furthermore, the destruction of the country's infrastructure and economy has created a black market paradise, Warlords, government officials, and opportunistic businessmen all feast on the carcass of the Syrian state. International sanctions, while intended to punish the regime, have inadvertently fueled illicit trade and empowered a new class of war profiteers. For ordinary Syrians who have endured unimaginable suffering, this systemic corruption is a final, cruel twist of the knife. It's the realization that even if the bombs stop falling, the predatory system built during the war will continue to steal their future. And now to South America, for a visit to Venezuela, a country that proves having the world's largest oil reserves is no guarantee of prosperity, especially when the government treats the national oil company like its own personal ATM, with a faulty withdrawal limit. Venezuela's story is a tragic spiral of political crisis, economic mismanagement, and corruption so vast it's hard to comprehend. The ruling elite has systematically dismantled democratic institutions, from the judiciary to the National Assembly, ensuring there are absolutely no checks on their power or their access to the nation's wealth. It's not just rigging the game, it's burning down the stadium and selling the scrap metal. The result has been a complete economic and humanitarian collapse. Hyperinflation has made the currency worthless, state-owned enterprises have crumbled, and millions have fled the country. Meanwhile, high-ranking officials and their cronies have allegedly embezzled billions, funneling money through complex international schemes involving everything from food import programs to currency exchange rackets. The very programs designed to help the poor, like food distribution, have become tools of social control and massive graft. Venezuela is a textbook case of how corruption can lead not just to poverty, but to the complete implosion of a once prosperous nation. Making our way back to the Middle East, we arrive in Yemen, a country enduring one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. And, like a fly to a festering wound, corruption has thrived in the chaos of its devastating civil war. With the country fractured between the Houthi rebels in the north and the internationally recognized government in the south, there is no single, coherent authority. Instead, you have competing factions, each using their control over territory to extort money and divert resources for their own gain. War is a business, and in Yemen, business is unfortunately booming for the wrong people. Humanitarian aid, the lifeline for millions of Yemenis on the brink of starvation, is a primary target. Reports abound of aid being blocked, diverted, and sold on the black market by all sides of the conflict. Fuel imports, essential for running hospitals and water pumps, are taxed and controlled by powerful cartels linked to the warring parties, driving up prices and creating artificial shortages. In Yemen, corruption isn't just about stealing money, it's about stealing food from the mouths of starving children and medicine from the desperately ill. It is, without exaggeration, a weapon of war. Next, we travel to Sudan, a nation that has been on a political roller coaster that would make most people violently ill. For decades, it was under the iron-fisted, kleptocratic rule of Omar al-Bashir, a man whose government was less a public service and more a criminal enterprise with a flag. During his reign, state assets were systematically plundered, and the country's resources were exploited to enrich a small cabal of military and political elites. The system was designed from the ground up to facilitate corruption, with accountability being a completely alien concept. And while the 2019 revolution that ousted al-Bashir brought a wave of hope, dismantling a deeply entrenched system of corruption is like trying to unscramble an egg. The transitional government has faced immense challenges, not least of which was the fact that many of the old guard from the military and security services remained powerful players. The subsequent military coup in 2021 was a massive setback, demonstrating just how fiercely the beneficiaries of the old corrupt system will fight to maintain their privileges. Sudan is a stark reminder that toppling a dictator is only the first and perhaps easiest step in the long, arduous fight against systemic corruption. Now for something truly special. Let me introduce you to Equatorial Guinea, a country that is essentially a family-run oil business with a seat at the UN. This small West African nation is one of the continent's top oil producers, which should, in theory, make its citizens incredibly wealthy. Instead, it has one of the world's largest gaps between national wealth and human development. Why? Because President Teodoro Obiang, Africa's longest-serving ruler, and his family appear to treat the national treasury as their personal checking account. It's less a government and more a real-life game of Monopoly, where one player owns everything and just occasionally throws a $20 bill at the others to stop them from flipping the board. The scale of the alleged plunder is honestly just breathtaking. The president's son, who is also the vice president, is notorious for his outrageously lavish lifestyle, flaunting supercars, mansions, and even Michael Jackson memorabilia, all while the majority of his country's population lives in abject poverty without access to clean water or basic health care. There is no transparency, no accountability, and no distinction between the state's finances and the ruling family's personal wealth. Equatorial Guinea is the poster child for the resource curse, a tragic demonstration of how immense natural wealth, when combined with absolute power, can corrupt absolutely. Our next destination is Afghanistan, a country that has become, honestly, almost synonymous with conflict and instability for over 40 years. This perpetual state of war has created a perfect environment for corruption to become, deeply embedded in the fabric of society. For 2 decades, under the US-backed government, billions upon billions of dollars in international aid poured into the country. But with weak oversight and fragile institutions, a staggering amount of that money was lost to graft embezzlement and phantom projects. It created what some call a ghost economy, where officials got rich from soldiers who didn't exist in schools that were never built. This systemic corruption had, really, devastating consequences. It hollowed out the Afghan security forces, eroding morale and effectiveness, which was a key factor in their rapid collapse in 2021. It also completely alienated the population from the government in Kabul, which was widely seen as predatory and illegitimate. Now, under Taliban rule, the situation is different, but honestly, no less opaque. The formal systems of corruption may have changed, but the country is now run by an internationally isolated regime, with no transparency, leaving the Afghan people trapped between the failures of the past and a deeply uncertain future. And now, for a country that is, well, in a league of its own when it comes to opacity, North Korea. The Hermit Kingdom is fundamentally a black box. Gauging corruption here is different because the entire state operates like a criminal syndicate under the absolute control of the Kim dynasty. The concept of public sector corruption is almost meaningless when the public sector and the Kim family's private interests are one and the same. The country's entire economy is geared towards enriching the elite and funding its nuclear program, often through illicit activities like cybercrime, smuggling, and arms dealing. For the average North Korean, corruption is really a matter of survival. Because the state's public distribution system has failed, citizens are forced to participate in black markets, or just to get by. This requires bribing officials at every level, from local party cadres to security agents, just to be able to buy and sell goods, travel within the country, or avoid being sent to a prison camp. It's a system of total, top-to-bottom corruption, where the state preys on its own people, and the lack of any external scrutiny allows it to fester in complete darkness. It's less a country and more, honestly, a cult with a standing army. Rounding out our list is Libya, another cautionary tale about what happens after a long-ruling dictator is overthrown without a viable plan for what comes next. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, the country has been mired in chaos and civil war, with rival governments and a patchwork of militias all vying for control of Libya's immense oil wealth. This power vacuum has turned the country into a playground for corruption. State institutions have collapsed, and control of key assets like the central bank and the National Oil Corporation is fiercely contested. The result is a free-for-all where powerful armed groups smuggle oil, weapons, and even people with near-total impunity. Billions of dollars in oil revenue have reportedly vanished into the pockets of militia leaders and corrupt officials who use the funds to further fuel the conflict. Public services have disintegrated, and ordinary Libyans are left to suffer the consequences of a war fought over the spoils of their own country. Libya is a tragic example of how the collapse of a state, even a deeply flawed one, can unleash a torrent of corruption that drowns any hope of stability or peace for years to come. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the world's corruption hotspots. It's a profoundly depressing list, and it's easy to feel a sense of hopelessness. But here's the thing. Corruption isn't some abstract, victimless crime. It has a real devastating human cost. It keeps children out of school, denies sick people medicine, traps families in poverty, and fuels the conflicts that force millions to flee their homes. Fighting corruption isn't just a matter of good governance. It's one of the most fundamental challenges for global development, security, and basic human dignity. A dollar stolen from a hospital budget in Yemen or a school construction fund in Afghanistan is a theft from our collective humanity. The systems that allow this level of graft to flourish are complex, and honestly, there are no easy solutions. But the first step is always awareness. Ignoring the problem, or treating it as just the way things are in certain parts of the world, is to be complicit in its perpetuation. We have to understand the mechanisms of corruption, from shell companies and offshore bank accounts, to the politicians who enable them. We must demand more transparency, not just from the countries on this list, but from our own governments and the international financial institutions that too often allow this stolen wealth to be hidden in plain sight. So what can you do? Stay informed. Read the work of investigative journalists who risk their lives to expose these stories. Support organizations like Transparency International, which work tirelessly to monitor and combat corruption worldwide. And most importantly, hold our own leaders accountable to ensure they are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because a more just and prosperous world is possible, but it has to be built on a foundation of integrity, not on the rotten bedrock of corruption. Thank you and good night.